the program's title, right? Vital Carmen. What makes this character, this story, this opera so compelling? Why has it stayed around for so long? And what I'd like to do is talk about the places behind the opera, some of the people, and through those two topics, help us think about this title character and why so many of us find her so gripping.
Oh, I can't wait. If anybody watching today has this afternoon, this evening, I have no idea what time it is. It's getting dark behind me. If anybody tonight has questions for Dr. Wilks or for any of the other guests that we're going to have, please engage in the live chat. We will be monitoring that and asking questions throughout the evening. Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elisa. And I'd also like to thank Emily Wells, Senior Producing Manager for HGOco, and Andy Horton, former Community Initiatives Coordinator, for inviting me to take part in this program. So as I mentioned, I'd like to talk about Carmen, the character, the story, the places, the people behind the opera. So I have a couple of slides to share with you, but rest assured, they're not text heavy. I have some pictures, so we can put some images right to the names that I'll be sharing. So first, who is Carmen? Then we'll move on to where Carmen takes place. Think about characters in the sense of who created Carmen, and then return to character in the singular sense, who is Carmen? But first, this opening image that we have here. This is a statue by the Spanish sculptor Sebastián Santos Rojos, entitled Carmen la Cigarrera. Carmen, the cigar worker, right? So this is the Carmen that we know if you're familiar with Bizet's opera. When the audience and Don José meet Carmen for the first time, she exits from the tobacco factory in Seville, Spain, where she works. So it's probably no surprise that if we think about the question of where Carmen takes place or of where Carmen is from, we think about the city of Seville, maybe the community of Andalusia, which is the larger area of which Seville is the capital, or the region of southern Spain, if we want to expand out a little bit further. Because Carmen, yes, is a French opera, but it's one that's set in Spain and it's about Spain. But as I mentioned earlier, I want to take us a little bit farther away from these familiar places and familiar moments. So on the next slide, I have a few more pictures from Seville that will help us think about what is going on in the opera. So first, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, there's a close-up of the entrance to the former Royal Tobacco Factory in Seville, aka also known as Carmen's workplace. And if you travel to Seville, Spain today, you can visit this building. It is now the rectory or the administration building of the University of Seville. So again, Carmen, Spain, Carmen, Seville. If we look in the lower right-hand corner, you have La Real Maestranza, Seville's bullfighting ring. And this is where, if we move forward to Act 4 of the opera at the end, this is where the bullfighter Escamillo, right, who's valiant, he's brave. This is where he promises to bravely fight the bull in Carmen's honor, right, and to bring her victory. And this is also just outside of the ring where Carmen has her fateful final encounter with Don José. So again, if you've heard about Carmen, maybe you've seen the opera before, these are places that are familiar, and these are places that help us to think about who this character is. So what's going on with the image on the left-hand side, right? The Archivo General de Indias, the General Archives of the Indias. Wait a minute. No one in Carmen, in any version that I've read or seen on stage, is going to the library. No one's spending time in the archives. So why do I have this image up here? It's here to remind us that Spain and the story of Carmen, right, is not only about Spain's relationship to France and how Georges Bizet, Prosper Mérimée, the author who wrote the story the opera is based on, are thinking about Spain. It's also somewhat about Spain's relationship to the Americas. And if we think about that relationship, then we have to remember Spain's role as a colonial power between the 15th and the 19th centuries. And much of that documentation from that history resides in the General Archives. So if you travel to Seville, this is another spot you can visit. It's free. There's an introductory film that interestingly has the archive as a character in the voiceover. And at the beginning and end of this approximately 15-minute film, the voiceover says in Spanish, "I am the General Archive of the Indies, memory of the New World." And so another important site in Seville, but again, how does this relate to Carmen? So the archives are there because Seville initially was the only Spanish port that was allowed to receive ships from the New World. And it was from Seville that ships left Spain to travel back to the Americas. And the principal Latin American port from which ships departed was Havana, Cuba. So we're going to take a trip to Cuba. We're going to travel across the Atlantic in the next slide and think a little bit about what the capital city of Cuba might have to do with Carmen. And hang in there, the connection is coming. So here we have a shot of one of the forts in downtown Havana, facing the water, as forts often did to protect the cities, right, from invaders. And so I have this here again because of the centuries-long relationship between Havana and Seville. And that commercial relationship was also a cultural one, right? So goods were traveling, people were traveling, art was traveling. And so this brings us to the song that Carmen sings when she makes her grand entrance in the opera. When she comes out of the tobacco factory, everyone is waiting for her. José is a little disinterested, but that's going to change. And the song that she sings is the habanera. If we think about what that word means at its most basic level, it can mean one of two things. So first, a woman, a female from Havana, and second, related to or about Havana, habanera. So what's going on with Carmen? She's not from Cuba as depicted in the opera or the story. So why would Bizet call this song, this very important song that is most often remembered from the opera, why would he call it habanera? He called it habanera because there's a second meaning or third meaning of the word that comes from music. And I'm going to quote my colleague Robin Moore here. An habanera is a Cuban vocal music and dance genre derived from the danza that reached the height of its popularity in the late 19th century. And this is the musical form that inspired the famous habanera in Bizet's opera. So this is why when I think about Carmen, yes, I'm absolutely thinking about Seville, I'm thinking about Spain, but I'm also thinking about Cuba and about the way in which Cuba and Caribbean culture more broadly found its way into this artwork that's now considered an epitome of French culture. So speaking of French culture, French opera, let's move to the next slide and think about who created Carmen. We've talked about some of the places. Let's talk about some of the people. So here on the slide, I have photographs of 4 gentlemen. On the far left, we have the Spanish composer Sebastián Iradier, and he wrote an habanera called El Arreglito that was published in Paris in 1862. And scholars have concluded that Iradier probably traveled to Cuba sometime around 1857, maybe as late as 1860. But he traveled to Cuba, heard the habanera, liked the form, and so when he got back to Spain, and then when he eventually traveled to Paris and he settled there, became, a music teacher and well-known part of the Parisian musical scene, he was writing and publishing habaneras. And it was El Arreglito that Georges Bizet heard when he was out and about in Paris, as artists do, right? To hear the newest and the freshest works. And so Bizet based Carmen's Habanera, capital H, on Iradier's Habanera, lowercase h, El Arreglito. Okay, so that's Bizet, just to the right of Iradier. And then the final two gentlemen on the slide are our librettists, Henri Meliac and Ludovic Halévy, both French authors, and they worked with Bizet and worked with the Mérimée novella to bring Carmen to life. They translated the novel into the lyrics that our characters sing, and they, sort of massage the story to take a novella that was read in a journal and translate it into something that would be compelling and interesting on the stage. So those are the big names that we traditionally think about when the question of who created Carmen comes up. But there's one more name that I want to think about, and this name is on the next slide. And this is going to lead us to that question of vital Carmen. How can we reconsider Carmen? What do we think we know? And what has changed perhaps since the opera's premiere in Paris in March of 1875? So here we have two images of French mezzo-soprano Célestine Gailly-Marié, and she was the original Carmen. She premiered in the role in March 1875. On the left, we have a photograph of her from the Atelier Nadar, which was a famous photography studio in Paris. And on the right, hopefully coming back, there we go, we have a portrait of her by the artist Henri-Lucien Doucet. And if you travel to Paris and go to the opera library, the Bibliothèque de l'Opéra, which is a research library, but there's also a tour that is open to the public. You can see this portrait of Carmen, of Gailly-Marié as Carmen hanging in the library. So why do I have Gailly-Marié in this mix? So again, she created Carmen, but what many people don't know is that she worked closely with Bizet and in fact was instrumental in bringing Carmen to the stage. Bizet was an up-and-coming composer when Carmen premiered. He was respected in Parisian musical circles, but he wasn't a star. Gailly-Marié, in contrast, was a star, and her commitment to the contract for this new work is what kept the Opéra Comique in the game, because there were some nerves about how the audience would receive Carmen. And when the directors were faltering about, we don't know if we want to go ahead with this, Gailly-Marié was like, no, I want to do this. I have faith in this composer. She had faith in Bizet, but she also had opinions. She was an expert artist. And so when Bizet shared the first version of the Habanera with Gailly-Marié, she sent him back to the composer's equivalent of the drawing board. She's like, this song is not quite working for me, Georges. We're going to have to do something else. So Bizet goes back to his work, right? And he returns with the Habanera that we know and love today. And as Elisa mentioned at the top of the broadcast, even if you haven't seen Carmen, you've probably heard parts of the Habanera and other segments of the work. So, places, people, who is Carmen? So I put together this sequence of images and facts to help us think and rethink who Carmen is. So the familiar narrative is she's a femme fatale, right? She's an exotic other. She's sexy, maybe a little scary because of the ways in which she seems to go through men, right? Romantic conquest. But I'd like to invite us to reconsider her tonight. And I'm glad that Jasmine and Andy are with us to help with that reconsideration. So I want us to think about Carmen as someone who is strong. I want us to think about her as someone who is assertive, who is vivacious, and who is straightforward. So if you have the chance to listen to Carmen between now and the opening at the Wortham Theater, if you have a chance to go to the Wortham, even better, listen to Carmen's music, yes, but also listen to the words. She's very straightforward. So there's no fooling anyone about who she is or isn't. It's more the case that people don't take her for her word. So I'm going to ask some questions, just kind of throw them out there. We have a video clip to look at, and then I'm really excited to hear the rest of the program and to hear your thoughts about Carmen. So the questions are, what if Carmen's sexuality is the least interesting thing about her? Yes, it is part of Carmen's character, but maybe it's just one of many pieces of this complicated, fascinating woman. Next, how can we reconsider the stereotypes that have been associated with and sometimes perpetuated through the character? So how can we rethink stereotypes and reject them about the Roma people, especially Roma women, about women in general, and also about Spaniards? Because again, this is a French interpretation of Spanish culture, but it's been adopted, right, and viewed around the world. And it's not necessarily 100% what Spanish life was like in 1830 Seville, which is when the opera is set. And then finally, how does this reconsideration help us to explain why there have been so many Carmen adaptations? And trust me, there have been a lot. Why has the story become a vehicle for telling the stories of women from different places and so many different backgrounds? So with that final question, I'd like us to watch a trailer from a film. This is a 2005 feature film. It won the Golden Bear at the Berlin Film Festival. It's by British filmmaker Mark Dornford May, and it's called U Carmen, Michaelicia. So let's take a look at this trailer. It's about a minute and a half, a little bit longer, and then I'll come back with some last words before we move on to the next part of the program. Okay, so as I said, the 2005 award-winning film U Carmen Michaelicia, 19th century French score by Bizet, 21st century post-apartheid South African setting. And I love this adaptation for so many reasons, but just a few of them are, one, it shows the adaptability, right, the translatability of the Carmen story, and I encourage you all to seek this out and watch it. Unfortunately, I don't think it's streaming, but you can find DVD copies floating around. Many libraries have DVDs of the film. this film is also an example of the way in which opera can be for everyone. And there I'm quoting Pauline Malefane, who stars as Carmen. You may have noticed her in the clip. She is wonderful in the role. And she was part of a theater company called Dimfo di Copani that collaborated with Mark Dornford May, music director Paul Hazelwood, first to stage Carmen for the stage. And then that production was so successful, it traveled to London after playing in Cape Town, South Africa, that the group decided to make a film. And so opera can be for everyone. In this case, the film is translated, the libretto is translated into Xhosa, which is a Southern Cape language. But also, if you watch it, you can see that there are ways in which the story of a woman, again, who is vivacious, who is straightforward, who is strong, who is assertive, and of a society that's not always quite ready to accept that, is one that can have currency and that can reach people around the world. So thank you for listening to this introduction. I look forward to speaking with Elisa, to hearing from Jasmine and Angie, and again, to hearing any questions and thoughts that you might have about Carmen.
I'm muted. I was muted. Jennifer, my mind is spinning already with so many things going. How did I not know these things? Why don't people talk about this? We get so like drawn into the performance that we see, and that's how Carmen is, and that's who
Absolutely.
she is. Absolutely. So exciting. We do have some excitement happening on the chat, and I just want to bring some things to light before we kind of move on here. One of our listeners, we have Yolanda out there. Hello.
Hi.
It says that they read an article that Bizet modeled Carmen after his wife, who is also Jewish. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so thank you, Yolanda, for your question. And in the book that I'm writing, I actually spend some time in the chapter on Bizet thinking about all of the women in his life and how they influenced the composition of Carmen. So not just Célestine Gailly-Marié, but also his wife, Geneviève Halévy. And if Halévy sounds familiar, it's because she was the cousin of librettist Ludovic. They were from a prominent a musical family in France, and also a prominent Jewish family. And so yes, I do think that Geneviève and her family influenced Carmen in that the Halévy and other members of the French Jewish community were insiders who were also outsiders, right? If we think about Carmen, she is a Roma woman, but one of her qualities, one of her skills is that she speaks multiple languages. And so when José first meets her, he's not quite sure where she's from. At first, he thinks she's a big city, woman, kind of scary because he's from the provinces, but she speaks Basque. And we see this more in the novella than we do in the opera. But she, is familiar with multiple cultures. She is from a diasporic people, a people who have scattered, and that tracks with the history of the Jewish people, right? And again, Bizet had this intimate experience with his in-laws. I would just add that I also think that Bizet's mother-in-law was an influence on Carmen as well, because she was a strong-willed woman also. I love that Bizet was surrounded by these strong women, from his collaborator and star, Gailly-Marié, to his wife, Geneviève, to his mother-in-law, whose name is escaping me. My apologies to the family. But yes, I think we can see that influence in Bizet's work.
That's fascinating. So I want to just kind of pick your brain a little bit about how we see Carmen in some other art forms. We know that, in visual art, specifically with Picasso, there was a period of time in which he focused. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So, Picasso, famous Spanish artist who in a way makes the reverse trip of the opera Carmen. So, world-renowned Spanish artist who settles in Paris and spends much of his life in France. And I think that Picasso's fascination with Carmen is a very important thread in this larger story of how Spaniards have become fascinated with Carmen, and this, telling of Spanish culture. Some things accurate, some things not, and then have sought to reclaim Carmen for themselves and to try to unpack and explore the mystery of Carmen. And so I think we see that in Picasso's, various drawings of Carmen, some of which are inspired by women he knew, but some of which are more, fanciful and sort of more driven by the myth. And then also Picasso was an artist who was fascinated by bullfighting, and represents that in his drawings and sketchings and some of his paintings as well. And Carmen is a story that, in which bullfighting plays a significant role. We don't actually have a bullfight depicted on stage in most productions. We usually stop just outside of the ring. And again, Carmen and Escamillo have a lovely moment before the his decisive match. He enters into the ring, but some critics have talked about Carmen being analogous to the bull. So she's this hunted being, right, whom men will not let rest. So I think, Picasso's engagement with the figure and with the myth are examples of this rich history and of the ways in which many artists, super well known as Picasso is and not so well known, have been drawn to this character.
Yeah, there's a New York Times article, if anyone's interested in kind of reading a little bit deeper on that, from 2007, titled "The Minotaur and the Muse: Picasso's Carmen Fixation." Goes pretty in depth. So that's a little bit of like a visual art kind of perspective on it. So what do we think about when the score is set for a ballet, for instance? I know we're about to watch something from ballet. Where does this come into play?
Yeah, so I love the dance adaptations of Carmen, because I think taking away the libretto, and I say this as a literature professor, so words are my thing, but still I think that taking away the words and thinking about how these characters are interpreted through movement, and solely through movement, because of course we have choreography in opera, right? We have movement on stage, and kudos to the singers of today who are often doing so much more than their predecessors in previous centuries. So we have movement, we have choreography on stage in opera today, but in dance, that's the primary means of communication along with the music. And I think that opens up some aspects of the character and maybe, shakes us out of those expectations that you mentioned a while ago, right? So we go to the opera, the music's familiar, the libretto's familiar, and we put all of those pieces together and we think we know who the characters are. But when you take one of those elements away and you're forced to focus on something else, I think that, that makes us think differently and sort of opens our minds about the character.
Great. So let's take a look at a ballet's interpretation of it. We'll just watch a short portion of that and then get some thoughts on it.
Sure.
Wow. I really hear what you're saying about when the movement, when you do take away those words, it's very raw and you can't really, your body doesn't lie, right? They always say, read the body language one, and it's just so visceral and raw, and that's just fascinating. What I thought was also interesting was we took a little liberty with the score as well there. So, and that happens quite a bit, doesn't it, in these reinterpretations?
It does. And so what we heard in that clip was Rodion Shedrin's Carmen Suite. And so it is maybe about half the length of Bizet's full score of Carmen. And I think that too, that adaptation and compression helps us to think differently about the story. And you may have also noticed that it's very spare in terms of staging and costume. And so we really find the National Dance Company of Spain performing in the clip, and choreographer Johan Inger and the visual designers working to tap into the psychological complexity of Carmen and really getting to the core and the heart of the story.
Yeah, it definitely that contemporary lens, looking at the story, how can we tell it slightly differently, paring things away. We actually have with us an artist who we asked to do something similar, to take a look with a modern lens. We just took away the words with a ballet. We're going to make it all about the words now, as we bring in Jasminne Mendez, who is an amazing Houston poet and playwright. Hello, Jasminne. How are you doing?
Hello, good evening.
Hello, Jasminne.
Great to have you with us. So we asked you to take a look at Carmen and to write some thoughts on it. And before we give you the floor, I'd like to just allow you to speak a little bit to your thought process and what we're going to hear from you tonight.
Yeah, so actually I was brand new to the story of Carmen. I had heard the music. When I heard the music, I was like, oh, I know this music. I'm very familiar with it, but didn't know the full story of Carmen. So, I watched the opera, I read summaries, I read some more of those articles that are out there and interpretations and theories and all that wonderful stuff about Carmen and about the character and the opera itself. And for me, I just took some time to really kind of reimagine Carmen in today. And so the poem that I'll be reading is in Carmen's voice. It's a persona poem in the voice of Carmen, but thinking about her sort of as this modern day woman and reclaiming, as Dr. Wilks said a little bit earlier, reclaiming her power and her agency and her strength. Right. So we are going to hear some of that sensuality and some of that sexuality in this piece, but as it really being part of her power and what makes her sort of, even what makes men drawn to her, right, is this like very independent, very powerful nature about her. And I'm also kind of thinking a little bit about some of the politics of what it's like to live as a woman like this, as well as the fate that she is led to, or that what happens to her in the end, and thinking about how that applies right to women around the world today, and I think that being one of the reasons why that story continues to be a classic is because, unfortunately, so many women do share her fate at the hands of men, and men that presumably love them, right? It's like they can't control this passion, and so that leads to this tragic demise. And so for me, it's kind of important to kind of bring in those ties to modern day as well. And I can talk a little bit about sort of the specific type of poem that I shared, but I'll start. So I chose. I was when asked to write a poem, sometimes you kind of just I do research and sometimes just let the words flow. But for this, I felt like I wanted some kind of a container, a form. But what's interesting, right, is that the character of Carmen is like goes against that, like very much so. Even what I read about how Habanera was constructed and the type of sort of I guess operatic structure and musical structure that is within that music, it pushes against, right, the standard norm, right, of what you traditionally hear in opera. And so I said, well, I've got to do that, right? I've got to pick a form and then just push against it and say, no, I'm not going to stay in this box, because if I'm speaking as Carmen, I've got to break free. And so I chose the villanelle form, which is a French verse form. It's very lyrical. It has a very strict rhyme scheme, ABA, very strict number of stanzas, 5 stanzas, 5 tercets, stanzas, tercets, and then a quatrain at the end. Well, mine has an extra stanza, so an extra tercet. So I've got 6 tercets and then the quatrain. And I don't really follow, I follow the rhyme scheme, but it's not, there's also internal rhyme. So you get kind of confused, like, oh wait, was that the end rhyme, the internal, right? So we're kind of, I'm pushing against that, right? So there's that rebellious nature. And the rhythm is also a little bit off, like you'll kind of see. And so I felt like that captured the essence of Carmen, in the sense, again, that she's this strong, rebellious spirit who's like, I'm not going to be contained. I'm here. I'm free. Let me be free. And so, but and again, it being an opera, I wanted to have sort of that lyricism and that musicality. And I felt like the villanelle lent itself towards that. And so, so that was kind of my process to get to where I arrived at with the poem tonight.
Wow. Well, you made me so excited to hear it. We're going to clear out of here and let you have the floor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So this is titled Nasty Woman, and it begins with an epigraph, a statistic from theglobalamericans.org. Every year, an average of 66,000 women are violently killed globally, accounting for approximately 17% of all victims of intentional homicides. Of the countries with the top 25 highest femicide rates, 50% are in Latin America. Today, they would say that I am nasty, a nasty woman, wild and free. Today, they would say my body is a bull, impossible to tame. Beware, Spanish blood will boil and spill, and still I'll remain a mystery. My skin is lawless surrender, a soldier's midnight fantasy. Swift hips, plum breasts, ripe waist woman, I carry no shame. My curves, ripples, and waves are an unruly, trespassed transatlantic sea. Men try to conquer the battlefield that is my brown body. They shout love and leak lust and beg to tie me up in chains. But the back of my neck, the curl of my ribs, and the salt on my lips belong only to me. From Brazil to Cuba and every place in between, women everywhere have shared my destiny. Silent rage erected in shallow graves, and men who like to treat us like game, meat to hunt and hurt until they crack a tooth on the brittle bones of their own jealousy. Femme fatale, they point and scream, as if the nape of my neck or the scent of my wrist were the cause of their insanity. Because I take your breath away, you think it fair to cause me pain. But your moonlit love and limp wick desire burns feebly and is not my responsibility. I'd bury a mountain and swallow all the souls lost at sea before I let a man come and contain or try to conquer and pray away my Cat 5 hurricane. Kiss me, kill me, carry or crucify my body. I will still claim the final victory. Rebellious bird, nasty woman, love, we all remain wild and free. Yet there will always be a Carmen for these impotent men to blame. And if men cannot control themselves, then why on earth should we? For the only lover I trust and want forever lives, resurrected inside of me. Thank you.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
Thank you.
That was
Amazing.
incredible.
Thank you.
All right, I need to let some of that in. And while we're all just processing what we just heard, can you please let all of our listeners know how they can follow your work, how we can find more out about you? Because wow, as Amy just said on our chat, wow, please let us know how we can follow you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm at Jasminne Mendez on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. That's 2 N's and an E. It's my full name. Also JasminneMendez.com if you want to look at my website and see other events that I have going on. But yeah, that's me. And I tweet about all kinds of fun writer life stuff and my daughter. So yeah.
That's fantastic. That was so powerful. Jennifer, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that incredible piece of art we just heard.
Yeah, so thank you, Jasmine, for bringing Carmen to life in a new and exciting way, but tapping into what I think are many of the key themes and qualities of the character. I was taking notes because I was so moved by your performance. I carry no shame. Men try to conquer the battlefield that is my brown body. This idea of Carmen as a Cat 5 hurricane blowing through town and no one knowing what happened to them. And then finally, if men cannot control themselves, then why on earth should we? Which I think is so striking because since we're back in the realm of words, if you look at the libretto, there are a couple of times when Jose, and here I'm using the French pronunciation, Jose to Spanish speakers, when his words are so convoluted. So in the flower song to Carmen, if I were a thing to you, si j'étais une chose à toi. And then at the end, Carmen, let me save you, and with you save myself. And it's because he can't control himself, right? And rather than taking the responsibility of controlling himself, he places it on Carmen. And I think that your poem, your Villanelle, speaks to that beautifully. I love your being thoughtful about the type of poem, about form, and then breaking it open. Carmen's voice cannot be contained, and so the Villanelle is not going to contain her. There's going to be an extra stanza. You're going to play with rhyme. Oh my goodness, thank you so much for sharing that gift with us.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad. No, thank you. I'm glad it resonated. I mean, as you were speaking about some of the way, you know, when you mentioned that some folks have analyzed or interpreted, you know, Picasso's work, for example, comparing her to the bull, I was like, okay, great, I got something right. You know, as I saw that as well, you know, that she's also, and the fact that she wears red and like these men are trying to sort of tame her. And I'm like, to me, it was a metaphor, right, for the bull and that. And I did also, I looked up the translation of the Habanera. And so I tried to pull a couple of words or lines from that as well, and integrated it into the piece. And yeah, so it was fun to write. It was different. It was definitely fun to write. So yeah.
And it was really fun to listen to. I want to hear it about 7 more times before I fully can like catch on to everything you said. But I think where you went with this and some of the things that we brought up actually works really well into this next segment when we're talking about the Habanera and Cuba, and you talked about Latin America and how, you know, from Brazil to, where did you say? To Cuba, to Cuba, right? Yeah. So, you know, all of these threads in there that people always think of Carmen being a French opera that's set in Spain, right? Like, oh my gosh, we've gotten it so wrong in so many ways. So we will have a chance, Jasmine, to bring you back, to bring some more questions. Any of our viewers, I want you to really think about what you just heard from there and hold on to your questions, and we will bring her back. And in the meantime, I want to bring in our next guest. This is Cuban tenor Andres Acosta, who's going to be sharing a piece of Cuban music history with us. You guys are also going to see Andres this holiday season at HGO in our world premiere of The Snowy Day, based on the book by Ezra Jack Keats. Welcome, Andres.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I just want to start off by saying, Jennifer, Jasmine, oh my God, I was watching myself in the standby, but I was like screaming at the same time because it was all so good. I'm just very happy to be here.
Well, we're thrilled to have you here, and yes, scream away. That's so good. I think what Jennifer is poking on right here, what Jasmine put into this, you know, opera really is for everybody, and these contemporary lenses, looking through a historic lens and bringing it back to modern day voices, I think is really where the future of opera is on this. So just thank you, Jennifer, for bringing such wonderful context into this conversation. Andres, I'd like to get you started here and ask you to just tell us a little bit about what you're going to share with us this evening.
Yeah, of course. So the piece that you all will see in just a second is titled Tu, and it's composed by Eduardo Sanchez de Fuentes. It was written, I think, in the late 1800s or so. He was like 16 when he wrote it. And for me, this sort of touches on, Jennifer, what you spoke about a little earlier. I think you mentioned that Carmen exudes this sort of strong, vivacious, and straightforward energy, right? And for me, this piece exudes the energy of the island. I think that, and in the ways that us Cubans, especially when we talk about La Habana, find pride in the nature that is the body and beauty of the country itself. It's funny when I comparing it to opera, right before I recorded this, I was like, this is sort of like Arinucio's aria in Gianni Schicchi when he's when he's singing about Florence, and he's but just the Cuban version of it. And in a lot of ways, it feels like the sort of pride that the Cubans carry with who they are, as it relates to my own Cuban identity. And I think hopefully you all enjoy it.
Well, we're really excited. We're going to clear out of here while the video comes in, and we'll see you once we're finished.
Thank you.
Adorable trigueña de todas sus flores, la reina eres tú. La palma que el bosque se mece gentil, tu sueño arrulló, un beso de la brisa al morir de la tarde despertó. Fuego sagrado, guarda tu corazón, el claro cielo su alegría te dio, y en sus miradas bajo donde Dios le das la noche la luz de los rayos del sol. Fuego sagrado, guarda tu corazón, el claro cielo su alegría te dio, y en tus miradas bajo el fondo de Dios de los ojos la noche y la luz de los rayos del sol. Dulce es la caña, pero más es tu voz, que la amargura quita del corazón. Y al contemplarme suspiraba verás, bendición de hermosa sin par. Ay, porque Cuba eres tú.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Yes, anyone who's wondering, that's what a tenor sounds like. Yes. Oh, we got
Thank
lots
you
of
all.
love coming in on our chat. Thank you so much for recording that for us. You know, of course, we are still in the world of COVID where we've been able, you're not even here in Houston, and neither of you are here in Houston with us. So we're really grateful for you to providing that copy for us and allowing our audience to hear. Jennifer, do you have any comments now that we've heard it?
Yeah, first I just want to echo your comment, Elisa, about the wonders of a beautiful tenor voice, which is why, and your voice is amazing, Andres. And I think it's it's why people root for Carmen and Jose. If the tenor has a fabulous voice, of course you're going to want them to get together, because who could resist that voice? So thank you for sharing your gift with us, and thank you for the selection of Tu. I think that the song evokes so much, as you said, about Cuba, about Cuban culture, about people's relationship to the land, and there's so much history there, right? So there's the verse about sugarcane, but your love, your love is better than sugarcane. It's sweeter than sugarcane, and erases all bitterness. The natural imagery there, I think, is so striking, and it makes me think about one of the more recent adaptations of Carmen that I think we might have a chance to talk about in a little bit, which is set in Cuba, and which positions Carmen as emblematic of the island and of the nation. And the last thing I'll say is, again, I love your selection of the song because it talks about natural beauty, but then about the profundity of that beauty. So Cuba and other islands in the Caribbean, yes, have these wonderful beaches, these palm trees. If you ever see a sugarcane field right before harvest, it's a beautiful sight to see, the stalks of cane. But there are real people who live there, right? There are these wonderful cultures that have grown out of this place. So thank you. Sorry to gush, but it was just such a lovely performance.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. We will have an opportunity to bring Andres back for any questions anyone has, any more gushing we want to do. We can gush until the cows come home on this one. And yes, Linda, we are excited to come and see Snowy Day, where he will be featured. Jennifer, I think we can absolutely go into the piece you were hoping to speak about with the reimagining in the new lens through Cuba. Please explain a little bit more about that as we pull up some clips to show.
Sure. So this is a show, actually a stage musical, right? So akin to what you would see on Broadway, the West End in London, and it's called Carmen la Cubana, so Carmen the Cuban Woman, and it premiered in 2016, so about 5 years ago, and it's the work of a British American Cuban team that worked together in Havana, in New York, and then the work eventually had its premiere in Paris. And it sets the story of Carmen in 1958 on the eve of the revolution that toppled the dictatorship of Batista. And so, as I mentioned just a moment ago, Carmen is emblematic of this new Cuba about to be born. She's emblematic of this, spirit of independence, which is always in the character, I would say, but it's just, showcased differently in this context. And the composers and orchestrators draw from Bizet's music. They talk about, wanting to respect Bizet's score, but they use primarily Latin forms. And so we have salsa, we have cha-cha-cha, we have mambo. And Carmen's entrance in the musical, Carmen la Cubana, is a cha-cha-cha. So she's still introducing herself. She's still demonstrating those characteristics that Jasminne, captured so wonderfully in her poem. But yeah, it's a cha-cha-cha.
All right, I can't wait to see it.
Tendrás el beso de mi maldición. Su maldición. Sal a pelear hasta que sea campeón, un gran campeón, eso será. Golpe a golpe tú ascenderás, pega hasta que sea rey. Diles quién ahora es el nuevo rey. Campeón será. Te quiero tal como soñé. Carmen, eres mi flor. Tengo ganas de
oh my goodness. And I love seeing that right after hearing Andres' piece, right? When we hear some of those 1800s themes of that music coming through, of what that music really is and how it has moved into the modern day. What an exciting adaptation on that. That is wonderful. And we have the whole crew here.
Hey.
Yes. What do y'all think of that last piece?
Oh my God, I want to go see it. No.
We all want to go see it. Yeah, and we want everyone to go see the piece that inspires all these other pieces. Bizet's piece and how many interpretations of it. It's a mark of a really incredible score when so many people are inspired by it. It's a mark of really good art when we have so much inspiration coming from it. I would love to just kind of go back to one of the first things, Jennifer, that you said, which is one of the most least interesting things about Carmen is her sexuality, right? Like, she's so often portrayed as just this sexual being, right? And what we've been finding in all of this is this misinterpretation of this woman, right? And I just want to touch base a little bit on that, because as we keep seeing these visual representations, I think we can really forget the conversation we're having right now. And when we go to see it, that's what it's about. Can you just talk a little bit more about that power play of using the sexuality to actually portraying who she really is, and how we can see past that? How can an audience start to see past that?
Sure. So, I want to go back to Jasminne's poem here, because I loved how Jasminne, kept Carmen's agency at the forefront, while also discussing Carmen's sensuality, because she is a sensual being, but as Jasminne also noted, because the men around her can't control themselves, they create this narrative, and sometimes people can come away from the story with this narrative that Carmen's sexuality is the cause of her downfall, and it's the cause of men's downfall. And it's not. It's because the men can't control themselves. And this is something that the director Mark Dornford May, who did U Carmen y Kaelicha, the South African Carmen, he says the problem is not with Carmen, it's with the people around her, right? Exactly. And so I don't want to give the impression that Carmen's sensuality is not something to acknowledge or to recognize. I would just say it's one of many fascinating things about her. And that's what I hope people come away from the opera and from other versions of the story with. So.
Yeah, and I think, Jasmine, if you can continue to kind of reflect on that, because I do feel you got that right, like smack at the heart of what she's talking about here. Can you speak a little bit more to this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like, I feel like there's sort of this narrative that we've often heard, or at least I feel like I've seen a lot in literature and just in other art forms. You know, there's nothing scarier than a woman who knows her power, right? Like, and Carmen knows her power, and she knows how she can get what she wants and control these men or not, right? And so throughout history, that's what we've seen. We're so afraid of like giving women, either not giving them power, but allowing women to just express this power and be independent and free. And so these negative tropes and these sort of negative stereotypes are placed upon them, like as if sexuality and knowing that and being sensual is bad or wrong, right? That's essentially what it's saying. And that's not true, or doesn't have to be true, right? And Carmen believes that and knows that, and she owns it. But, you know, as Jennifer was saying, like the rest of everyone around her is putting this onto her as a negative thing. And for me, in my poem, it was important for her to take, you know, to say, no, this is my power. I own it. I know it. I'm here, but I'm also, it's one of the things that defines me, but also, right, sort of my independence and my freedom and my desire to love who I want to love is also part of what makes me, right, this powerful, strong woman. And it's part of who I am. But people don't want to hear that, even today, right? People are scared of that. They want to tell women what to do and where to be and how to do it. And she pushes against that completely.
Yeah. That's what I really loved about your poem, Jasmine. And I know we've all talked about it, and I will continue to talk about it. But as you were reciting your poem, I was like, I want to see this version of the opera as well, you know. And it's not that the libretto needs to be updated. It's exactly what you are talking about right now. It's about what is the, you know, the central part of the story that we're telling in whatever version of Carmen is told next. And just thank you for sharing your thoughts so beautifully. And yeah, more of that, definitely.
Much more of that. We have some comments coming through from our viewers. Again, thank you all so much for being part of our chat and chiming in. If anyone else has questions, please put them into the live feed. Linda is saying it's an age-old story. Men can't control themselves. They blame the woman. She gets killed. Is she the victim, the heroine, or something else? I'd like to take that's a hard question, Linda.
I don't know if I'm qualified to answer that yet.
Well, I think, yeah, go ahead, please.
Oh no, I was going to say, you know, I think I'm going to make the move that I often make in class, and that often frustrates my students. But I think that's just because the art that we are, you know, lucky enough to see, to hear, to experience is often so rich. And that move is, this is not an either or, it's a both and. So I would say Carmen is the victim because she is subjected to Jose's violence. You know, she's killed, but she's also the heroine because you cannot forget her. You can't forget her in terms of character development. And then also you can't forget her in terms of music. And so the musicologist Susan McClary, who's written a lot of fantastic work on Carmen, says that, you know, Carmen dies and the curtain falls, but it's her music that you're humming when you leave the theater. Yes. And so, you know, I think that's why I keep coming back to the story, which can seem so depressing and so violent, but it's because Carmen's vitality surpasses all of that. So I would say she's victim, she's heroine, and she probably is something else too. She's just that complicated.
Well, and our viewer, Amy Kelly, actually says very similarly to what we were just speaking at. She says, curious, when did the initial flip become such a widely reinterpreted and loved piece? women who today see themselves in Carmen are still rejected in current society.
I have thoughts, but I don't want to dominate the conversation. So if someone else wants to go first, please do.
I don't know when the initial flip became, but I mean, I immediately sort of resonated with the piece and saw her strength, right, and saw her power rather than sort of this evil femme fatale, right, that it's her fault that she does this, and why does she do this to these men, and etc. I connected more with her, right, and I didn't see her as a victim, and that's why I said in my poem she has the final. I still have the final victory because, as you all said, at the end, we're humming her songs. We remember her songs. Right. And so even though she is, in the story, she dies, right? At the end, like we're left thinking about her and not these like ridiculous men who are just violent and terrible, right?
Yeah. And I don't want to speak for any women. So I will speak to part of the comment before about men. I identify as a man, and I control myself as well as I can, and I try and be thoughtful of that. So I don't think that all men fall into that stereotype. So that being said, I think that we can look at the ways in which Carmen does actually end up fighting for herself in the actual libretto, in that she doesn't give in to José, and although she dies and ends up being a victim in that case, she still has her pride at the end, does not give that up, which is for the time period that it was written, and I think speaks to the smaller amount of voices that now resonate louder, and that is what created the flip as we realize it.
Yeah, I would just add that if we think about Escamillo, our Toreador, so he's not in the opera as much as José, but he's characterized quite differently. And so there are three key moments: Act 2, when he makes his entrance, Act 3, when he connects back up with Carmen and the gang, and then Act 4, just before the bullfight. And when you see the opera, like, notice how he interacts with Carmen and how he responds to the news that, like, maybe she's taken, maybe she's available. He responds very differently than José does, and I think there's much to be said for his being the dashing bullfighter. I often say that he would be a professional athlete, or as we saw in Carmen la Cubana, he's sometimes reinterpreted as a prize fighter, also a professional athlete. But he inhabits his masculinity very differently than José does. And so I encourage people to think about that when viewing Carmen as well.
There is so much we can continue to keep digging deeper and deeper on this. Even in our chat, more things are coming up that I feel if I bring them up, we are going to be here for another hour. But just one of our viewers talks about when to address the domestic and intimate partner violence. It's so inherent in this opera and so many others. I think we're really speaking to a lot of what we see in these operas and how that reflects back from our day-to-day life. And these are, as we said earlier, age-old stories. I do want to let folks know that you can come and see the opera. We have single tickets available on October 28th. And we're going to pop in our live chat a discount code so you guys can come and see that. And after 20 months, we're going to be live putting on our production of Carmen. And also, thank you so much for all the wonderful praise that is coming through on this. Aaron says in the chat that it was a great point Andres made. Most men do not control themselves. We speak to the minority of men who do not control themselves as if they were the norm. and they most certainly are not. So the social protocol, ooh, it keeps moving on me. The social protocol themselves as if they are the norm, and they're most certainly not. So the social protocol should be to ostracize the possessive, jealous men and hold them accountable for their beliefs and words before they have a chance to act out their violent male privilege. We have a fiery audience. I love it.
Good.
Oh, well, I want to thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, all of our viewers, for being here. Andres, we found out how to follow Jasmine. How can we follow you?
At andres.acosta.tenor on Instagram, and Acosta, tenor on Facebook.
Fantastic. And Jennifer, if folks want to get in touch with you or follow your work, what's the best way they could do that?
So I am on Twitter at Comparatista, Comparatista. And they can also Google Jennifer Wilks, UT Austin, and that'll pop up my faculty webpage.
Fantastic. You all have so much to offer the world. I can't wait to bring you all together on another topic, because this is just scratching the surface on how many different viewpoints we can take in with so much expertise. It has been a wonderful evening with the three of you. And Alan, thank you so much for providing your services for our group today. I would love to extend a welcome to Houston to come see our shows. Andres, we will see you soon at the Snowy Day. Jennifer, Jasmine, come find us at Carmen. We'll make sure to say hello. And in the meantime, I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for your time, expertise, and generosity. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.